Welcome on into the Wolverine.com podcast. Clayton Sayfie here on a Thursday, July 11th, doing something a little bit different this week. We are going to run down Michigan's entire schedule and give you one thing to know about each opponent, each game, a couple quick hitters in addition on each opponent as well. But solo show today. We're going to run through it from August 31st against Fresno State all the way until the regular season finale against Ohio State. Give you some things to know, give you some things that you can bring up in conversation with your fellow Michigan fans as you anticipate the start of Michigan's football season. Before we get into it, make sure to like this video. Let's get to 300 likes. Hit the thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. And if you want Michigan to beat Ohio State for a fourth straight season, hit that thumbs up. Want to see that support from Michigan fans. Let's get to 300 likes. Subscribe to our channel here on YouTube. And head to the Wolverine.com. As always, we got all the premium information over there. Intel on the message boards, intel in our articles, premium analysis, exclusive interviews. We were just out with Donovan Edwards at a camp the other day. A couple stories from that from myself and Anthony Broom. You can use the promo code UM1 for 2 months of premium access for just $1. So gets you into the football season for just $1. No reason not to try us out over at thewolverine.com. Also, before we get into it, thewolverineondemand.com is your place to order the 160-page 2024 Michigan football preview magazine that we wrote earlier this summer. Just came out in the last week. If you pre-ordered it, you have your copy, but there are still copies available, so get that right now. Find yourself on the beach somewhere nice in the summer reading about your favorite team, the Michigan Wolverines. So go and do that right now. Link is in the description, or at thewolverineondemand.com is also the place to order. Let's get into it. Let's start with August 31st, the season opener against Fresno State. And the one thing to know about the Bulldogs is that Fresno State is 49th in FBS history with 645 all-time wins. They've been ranked in the AP Top 25 for at least 1 week in 5 of the last 7 years. And they're 4-11 against Big Ten opponents. So this is kind of a dangerous season opener for any team. Just last season, they went into Purdue, won that game. Of course, Purdue wasn't very good. But in the past, they've also beaten Illinois 2 times and Wisconsin once. They do have a pretty good quarterback, junior Mikey Keene. He has a chance to lead the Mountain West best offense based on doing some research on this team here. This offseason, they have a good kicking game. They have an offensive line that is coming back. A lot of those key pieces there, as well as the skill position players. And the defense wasn't as good last season, but could improve this year with a lot returning. So the one concern from a Fresno State standpoint is that they didn't run the ball particularly well last season. It's not really their MO. They're known for kind of having a high-flying offense. Of course, Kalen DeBoer did great things there before moving on to Washington and then going to Alabama. But they didn't run the ball well, and they didn't stop the run. And that's why I feel like it's going to be tough for Fresno State on August 31st because Michigan lost a lot from last season. But what they didn't lose is their identity, and Sharon Moore has kept that intact, that they're going to play physical football. They're going to run the ball, especially with question marks at quarterback. You're going to see a lot of the ground game with Donovan Edwards, Kalel Mullings, all those guys, the offensive line trying to mesh together. So a little bit of a tricky game potentially in game 1, but also you feel like Michigan matches up pretty well with Fresno State. And it'll be a nice test, especially for the pass defense before the next week when Michigan plays against Texas. And the one thing to know about them is that they do have a great quarterback. Quinn Ewers coming back has the 3rd best odds to win the Heisman Trophy. According to DraftKings, he's at plus 950. Just behind Georgia quarterback Carson Beck at plus 800 and Oregon quarterback Dylan Gabriel at plus 800, both tied as having the best odds to win the Heisman Trophy according to DraftKings Sportsbook. We'll, of course, talk about Dylan Gabriel later on when we get to Oregon, but this is going to be a game with a ton of juice in the Big House. And think of this weekend in Southeast Michigan. You have September 7th, Michigan, Texas. The next night, the Lions open up their season against Matthew Stafford in the Los Angeles Rams on Sunday Night Football, that place may burn down. Just the entire region of Michigan, maybe the entire state. And if both teams win, there will probably never be more excitement. I guess you could argue this past January after Michigan won the national title and the Lions made a playoff run. Probably that, right? But in terms of regular season, never more excitement for in the state of Michigan for football. We'll see what Michigan State does as well. But Quinn Ewers is just a fantastic place to start for Steve Sarkisian and Texas coming into this season. The concern for them is what they lost on the defensive line. Tavondre Sweat, as well as Byron Murphy, two first-round picks on the D-line there in the interior. So that's kind of their question mark. On the flip side, Michigan's strength is the D-line going up against what should be a pretty good Texas offensive line. So it'll be an interesting battle. Texas favored early on in the offseason, but I wouldn't read a ton into that here this early. It's going to be a heck of a game, and it's going to be a great environment. I think Texas fans will travel pretty strong to Ann Arbor, want to see the Big House, and I think Michigan fans are going to do the same thing at Oklahoma next year and at Texas in 2027 when they play. It's just kind of the way it goes when you get these matchups when teams don't play each other all that often. Michigan and Texas have only met one time in the Rose Bowl, so they've never played on these campuses. These fans are going to want to check out the Big House. That's why if you're a Michigan fan, you're probably thinking, okay, I'm not selling my tickets online. I'm only selling them to somebody I know is a Michigan fan, and somebody I know is not going to sell those tickets in return, because you want to keep as many Michigan fans at the Big House as possible. But it's going to be a really fun matchup. And one, it's hard to even picture Michigan and Texas in the Big House playing, but it's going to be extremely, extremely exciting. Week 3, Arkansas State comes in to the Big House on September 14th. And something to know about Butch Jones and the Red Wolves is they have 15 starters returning. They also have a good young quarterback. Jalen Rayner was the Sun Belt Freshman of the Year last season. They have 3 starting offensive linemen back, including a first-team All-Sun Belt honoree, Jacob Beyer at center, and quite a few weapons around the field. But Rayner threw for 2,543 yards and 17 touchdowns last season. So when you look at these matchups against lesser opponents, right, I don't think it's a hot take to say Arkansas State has less talent than Michigan, significantly less. I mean, the gap is extremely wide there. But when they have a quarterback, they have some weapons. When they have some offensive linemen that can maybe compete in the trenches a little bit, it's going to be tough against the Michigan D-line. But if they're solid up front, then you get a little bit worried just because of what could go wrong. It's kind of the theory, and this is to a lesser extent than what it is when you get into Big Ten play, because Maryland has much more talent than Arkansas State. But it's kind of the theory when you play Maryland, you know, at least when they had Talia Tagovailoa and some good receivers and some better talent under Mike Locksley than they had in years past, you kind of feel like they're going to give you, or they at least could give you, a test. And they have for Michigan last couple of years. But just, because they have this one thing they can do well. They can throw the ball a little bit. They have some good receivers. They have a good quarterback. They can test you. I don't think Arkansas State is to that level at all. Rayner is a good quarterback. I don't think he's going to be a great one, but it's just something to look out for, that they do have a solid player back there that has had some success as a freshman. So let's move on to the next game, which is the Big Ten opener against USC. Never thought we'd be saying those words either. USC coming into the Big House. Lincoln Riley, they're coming off an 8-win season, which was a pretty big disappointment after making the Pac-12 championship game in 2022. But Lincoln Riley, the thing to know about them, he hit the reset button on defense this offseason. He fired his longtime coordinator, Alex Grinch, who followed him from Oklahoma to USC. He replaced him with Dan Lynn, 34-year-old stud defensive coordinator who was just at UCLA and had, led a complete turnaround there for the Bruins. They finished 10th nationally in total defense last season after ranking 87th the year before. He moves over across town, probably didn't even have to move houses, to USC. And there's a lot of optimism that he can at least help this USC defense improve. I don't know that they're going to make that big of a difference, especially with the level up in competition heading to the Big Ten compared to what UCLA was able to do last season with Dan Lin in there. But he clearly is a rising star in the business, and he's very, very similar to Mike McDonald and Jesse Minter, and he happens to run the same system. He spent time with Wink Martindale and the Baltimore Ravens in 2021, spent 2 years there, runs that same defense. It's kind of the new thing in college football and even the NFL. You see Mike McDonald now, the head coach of the Seahawks, Jesse Minters, the D coordinator of the Los Angeles Chargers. Ravens are still obviously running their system. I believe the Packers are running that system as well. This is working across college football, across football at multiple levels right now, this system. So it's something to watch out for because USC is going to have at least an adequate offense. They have done an unbelievable job, and not just USC, but going back to his time at Oklahoma, of no matter who the quarterback is, no matter really who the players are, Lincoln Riley has had great offenses. A little bit of a quarterback battle going into fall camp for them. Miller Moss impressed in the bowl game there in the Holiday Bowl. He's not guaranteed to win the starting job, but it looks like he's the favorite at this point. You just have to trust that Lincoln Riley is going to have a good quarterback and a good offense. If they can figure out the defense at least a little bit, this could be a formidable team. It's going to be tough adjusting to the Big Ten, but this is a team potentially that could do something. The weird thing is Dan Lin comes in. They do have some talent on defense, not enough. But no matter who the coordinator's been, no matter what the system has been, Lincoln Riley defenses have not been any good. I don't know how that's the case. Is it how he structures practice? Is it just the mentality they instill on a daily basis to their program? Probably a little bit of both and more, obviously, factors that we're not going to know sitting here in Ann Arbor. But they finished better than 65th nationally in yards allowed per game twice in just 7 seasons with Lincoln Riley as a head coach. Those are his teams going from Oklahoma to USC. So no matter who the coordinator's been, they've struggled defensively. If they don't get a lot better, the adjustment to the Big Ten is going to be really tough for them. September 28th, Minnesota comes to Michigan. And the one thing to know is that there is so much riding on how quarterback Max Brosmer transitions from the FCS, where he was at New Hampshire, to Minnesota. The grad transfer, he was an FCS All-American. He led the FCS in passing yards per game, in total offense. Last season, he moves up a couple levels. You know, you think maybe one level up from the FCS is a group of 5 team, and then a completely other big jump is moving into a conference like the Big Ten, maybe even another level, because you say maybe the Big 12 or the ACC is one level up, and the Big Ten and SEC would be kind of their own beast. So you have no idea how this guy is going to transition. But in my mind, after watching Ethan Kaliak-Manis a few times on TV and then once in person in Minneapolis, and he's now at Rutgers, you can't get any worse, really. And no offense to Ethan Kaliak-Manis, but it was a rough watch last season. And the reason why a lot is riding on what Max Brosmer is going to do is because there's actually quite a lot returning around him. They have 4 starting offensive linemen coming back, including second-team All-Big Ten selection Ursary at left tackle. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his first name. But he was fantastic last season. You're seeing him pop up on preseason All-American lists. Sophomore running back Darius Taylor, Detroit native. He had almost 800 rushing yards, 5th most by a freshman in school history. Only played in 6 games. Like, this dude was extremely impressive and productive in the limited amount of time that we saw him on the field. He missed the game against Michigan last season, which was a pretty big storyline coming in. Michigan ended up destroying them anyway, but coming in, people were worried. And Minnesota had some success running on Michigan a little bit, if you remember, especially in the first half of that game. So they're going to have an identity. They have a lot coming back on defense as well. They have a new D coordinator after Joe Rossi left for the same job at Michigan State, but Corey Heatherman comes in, previously the linebackers coach at Rutgers, and a lot to work with there on defense for PJ Fleck. So this is a team that's going to have an identity. It's sandwiched in between USC and Washington. Potential trap game for Michigan. Let's talk about Washington. October 5th, first road game for the Wolverines. They head to Seattle. And the thing to know about the Huskies is that they are going to look completely different than the team Michigan saw just over 6 months ago in the national championship game in Houston. Like, cannot stress how much different this team is going to look. And it's kind of funny because we were there in Houston, and I think the day before the game, they had a joint press conference between Kalen DeBoer and Jim Harbaugh. And Jim Harbaugh fielded multiple questions about his future. There was even some reporter from Houston asking, which NFL team are you going to go to after the year? And then everyone here knows Jim Harbaugh. He's not answering that question at all. Kalen DeBoer didn't get any of those questions. Turns out, a few days after the national championship game, he's out. He heads to Alabama very quickly. He was the first one to leave. Jim Harbaugh goes. But so much has changed with both programs. Way more has changed with Washington in a short amount of time here after the national title game. Jedd Fisch is now the head coach. Of course, spent a couple years, 2015, 2016, with Michigan. Steve Belichick, the son of Bill Belichick, is the defensive coordinator. Washington had 10 guys drafted, tying a program record in the 7-round draft era. They had over 24 players who left through the transfer portal. They had 12 players come in with Fisch from Arizona. The offense is completely different. Top 10 individuals on the Washington team in offensive snaps from last season are no longer with the program. Just 2 starters on the entire team come back. They're both on the defensive side of the ball. Huge win for Jedd Fisch early on was to retain Will Rogers, who was the Mississippi State quarterback who was on the sideline for the national title game, had already enrolled at Washington at the time, coming over from Mississippi State. Entered the portal briefly. Jedd Fisch was able to reel him back in from the transfer portal. He withdrew from the portal, and it's just a great place to start. You talk about some of the quarterbacks Michigan will face early on in the season. Very similar in that this is the guy you're building around. He's second in SEC history in career passing yards with over 12,000. He's fourth in touchdowns thrown with 94, and he started 40 games in college football. So this is a guy with a ton of experience, somebody that Jedd Fisch can trust early on in his career as he tries to kind of rebuild Washington despite taking over a program that made the national title game last season. All right, let's move on to Illinois, which Michigan will play on the road after a bye week, October 19th. Thing to know about Illinois, they brought in a bunch of transfers on defense, including former Texas cornerback Terrence Brooks, who Michigan was going pretty hard after in the transfer portal this spring. They took a massive slide defensively last season. Illinois did. They ranked first in the country by giving up just 12.8 points per game in 2022. Then they ranked 96th in the country in that same category last season. They were 65th against the run, 71st against the pass, and that's in a Big Ten West that had, I think, no offenses ranked better than 80th in the country. So you're talking about quite the slide there. Ryan Walters, of course, was their D coordinator in 22. He left to become the head coach at Purdue, so that could play into it. Another quick hitter about Illinois, Luke Altmaier at quarterback. If you watched him early last season, he was terrible. I couldn't believe that they left this guy in. He turned the ball over, I think, 4 times against Penn State. He threw 7 interceptions in his first 3 games there. Then he has a 3-game stretch towards the end of the year where he has a touchdown to interception ratio of 7-2. He got hurt. He got concussed. He kind of lost the starting job, but is going to be the starter and is the best option for Illinois at quarterback this coming season. He transferred in from Ole Miss before last year, was kind of thrown into the fire. He said this spring that he feels much more comfortable back there. So they will have improved play at the quarterback position. Michigan State will come to the Big House on October 26th. And what we know about Michigan State is that it's not going to be a revolving door at quarterback, at least as long as they stay healthy. It's not going to look like it did last season when they were just kind of throwing guys out there, seeing if they could, one, stay clean and not get completely demolished out there due to their offensive line. But it's also going to be pretty good play. A lot of people are high on Aiden Childs, their quarterback, coming in with head coach Jonathan Smith from Oregon State. He's mobile as well, 6'3", 200 pounds. Was the backup last year to DJ Uiagalelei at Oregon State. He completed 24 of his 35 passes for 309 yards in 4 touchdowns in 9 appearances. He's a former top 175 recruit, was the number 7 quarterback and 30th best overall player in the country to transfer this offseason, according to the On3 industry rankings. They also bring over a stud on offense in Jack Velling, tight end, who had 8 touchdown catches last year. That was tied for the most by a tight end in the FBS regular season in 2023. Question mark on the offensive line. Again, they had a bunch of defensive linemen transfer out as well. So you don't really know what Michigan State's going to be early on. They're not expected to do much. Jonathan Smith, his last 3 years at Oregon State, won 65.8% of his games. So this is a good coach. I just don't know situationally how tough this rebuild is going to be, and also how quickly he'll be able to rebuild it if he is able to at all. Let's move on to Oregon coming in. And the thing to know about Oregon is not a stat. It's more of just a feel thing here. They're one of the hottest teams in college football, perception-wise, in the media, preseason expectations coming into 2024. And you're seeing them on the recruiting trail get top-level guys. You're seeing them get guys in the transfer portal that are very coveted as well. Rick Neuheisel, former college football coach, claimed on Sirius XM, I think earlier this week, that Nike founder Phil Knight, who's 86 years young, is providing Oregon with, quote, unlimited NIL money. He wants to win a national title before his time here is done. The thing about Oregon, though, and they're still building, so you have to give them the benefit of the doubt to an extent, because Dan Lanning has done a really good job continuing what Mario Cristobal did in his short time there before moving on to Miami. The weird thing is, too, Oregon's had 2 straight coaches leave for quote-unquote better jobs, but it was Willie Taggart going to Florida State. That was kind of his dream job, and then Mario Cristobal going to Miami, which was where he played in his dream job. So Oregon's still a destination type of spot. But Dan Lanning has yet to win his biggest games yet. He hasn't beaten Washington. He lost by 3 points both times last year, including in the Pac-12 championship game, the other game being in Seattle, so a road game, but they could have won that one if they didn't have if they would have taken the points a couple times, not had some of the risks they took on 4th down. But this has become a hot spot for transfers, a hot spot for high school recruits. They're consistently showing up as a preseason top 5 team, top 2 in the Big Ten, behind Ohio State. One of the reasons for that is they might have the best quarterback in the conference, at least coming into the season. Dylan Gabriel has started 49 career games across 5 seasons in college football. He spent 3 years at UCF, 2 at Oklahoma, and he was one of the more surprising moves in the transfer portal. The fact that he entered the portal in December. He threw for over 3,600 yards last year, 30 touchdowns for a team that went 10-3. He knows how to win. He can be successful. It's going to be tougher against some of these Big Ten defenses, but he just has so much experience and was really just such a big pickup for Oregon after they lost Bo Nix to the NFL last season. They have some of their top skill position players that departed. Have some questions on defense as well, with just 4 starters coming back, but they did bolster things with the transfer portal as well. And front 7 is kind of one of the big question marks right now, but again, they did add some transfers, so we'll see how they gel together. Indiana is the road trip for Michigan on November 9th. New coach, new era after Tom Allen gets ousted in Bloomington. Curt Cignetti comes in from James Madison. And I have to mention the quote that he had at his opening press conference when he was asked, how are you going to sell to recruits that you guys can win here? He says, I win. Google me. He has won just about everywhere he's gone. He has a really good track record. Indiana's not James Madison, though. Not ruling out him winning, because they did add some talented players through the transfer portal this offseason. Kind of a sneaky one of those teams that has more talent than you would think coming into this year. They also were able to get back Donovan McCulley, who entered the transfer portal, wide receiver, ended up withdrawing. Michigan was in on him. I believe he visited Michigan back in December, but he decided to come back to Indiana. Their quarterback is going to be Curtis Rourke. He's a grad transfer from Ohio, the Bobcats. Started 33 games over 5 seasons there. He was the 2022 MAC Offensive Player of the Year. And offense is Cignetti's calling card. So they're going to improve from what they were last season offensively, you would think, especially with how bad they were last year offensively. They averaged only 22.2 points per game. They only had 13 plays of 30-plus yards. One of those was a trick play touchdown against Michigan. And, that was a complete rout. They got up 7-0 on Michigan. I think Michigan won 52-7. But defense, they got to figure that out. You got to believe, though, Indiana's going to be a little bit frisky. For Michigan, they have been in the past. It's kind of weird going down there. Even in 2022, Michigan was tied 10-10 at half. They lost there in 2020. They were actually pretty good there with Michael Penix. Michigan was obviously way down. Joe Milton threw 2 picks. Aiden Hutchinson got hurt. 2019, Michigan does win going away 39-14. Shea Patterson and Nico Collins were awesome in that game. They kind of just went crazy. Nico had 3 touchdowns. 2017 goes to overtime. Michigan pulls it out 27-20. And then 2015 went to triple overtime, 48-41 win for Michigan. One of those games towards the end of the year that Jake Rudock really started to cement himself as a good quarterback for Michigan. Ends up getting drafted, because of the end of the year that he had, especially solidifying it with the bowl game against Florida. But one of his coming out party type of moments was that game against Indiana in a triple overtime win. But things can get weird down in Bloomington. We've seen that. November 23rd, Michigan hosts Northwestern, coming off of their second bye week of the season. Northwestern is an extremely interesting team because everybody remembers, right? Pat Fitzgerald gets fired last summer, right around this time, for the hazing allegations, widespread allegations against the team. And then David Braun takes over. He was entering his first season as an FBS defensive coordinator. He was not on the staff the year before. I think that's one of the reasons why they promoted him, because of what had gone on there in years past. And then he leads them to a bowl game. They beat Utah in their bowl game. The thing to know about Northwestern, though, is that they had 6 wins last season by 1 possession. They win overtime against Minnesota, win by 3 points against Howard, 1 score against Maryland, Purdue, Illinois, and then also Utah in that aforementioned bowl game. So usually when a team has that many close wins, they're due to regress. I think they overachieved last season, but towards the end of the year, look ahead spot for Michigan. They've struggled in this game, the penultimate game of the regular season, the last 2 years against Illinois and then Maryland last season. So it's something to watch for, definitely. And you do have to give David Braun credit for what he's done there in a short amount of time at Northwestern. Here's a quirk from this game to know. A.J. Henning is an Illinois native who will take on his former team, Michigan. Had a productive year at wide receiver last season, 45 catches, 418 yards, 4 touchdowns for the Wildcats. He's also returning punts and kicks for them. And then Josh Preeb, a Michigan native, will take on his former team in Northwestern. He's slated to start at left guard for Michigan, all Big Ten, third-team performer last year. So a couple really good players, 2 of the best players that'll play in this game. They're from the state that they now are playing in, playing against their former team. And now the big one, Ohio State, November 30th. Michigan goes into Columbus, where they've won only once since 2000. Happens to be the last meeting in the horseshoe between the two teams in 2022. Michigan wins 45-23. I think Donovan Edwards is still running at this point. I wonder if he's getting tired yet. The thing to know about Ohio State, they have a pretty loaded roster coming back. I think their boosters got desperate. They bought the best team that money could buy in college football. Bring a bunch of guys back. They had only 4 NFL draft picks last season. It's the least amount they've had since just sending 3 in 2013. So quite a long time ago at this point. They also brought in key transfers. Their projected starting quarterback, Will Howard from Kansas State. Running back Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss. Safety Caleb Downs from Alabama, who's one of the best players probably in the country. Seth McLaughlin, the center from Alabama, who couldn't snap for his life in the Rose Bowl. They have 15 starters coming back, including 8 on offense, many of whom could have headed to the NFL draft after last season. So it feels like Ohio State has pushed their chips into the middle, no pun intended, because Chip Kelly is now their offensive coordinator. They plucked a sitting head coach of a fellow Big Ten program, UCLA, as their offensive coordinator. But the thing about this Ohio State team is they've pushed their chips in the middle. They have a good team. They've had good teams on paper in the past. This one might be better, but you still don't know how good the offense is going to be. You lose a lot there. You are inserting a new quarterback into the offense, Will Howard, who's had an up and down career. He's a dual threat guy. He's going to be able to provide you production in both the pass game and the run game, but he was up and down at Kansas State. There's so much pressure on Ryan Day to not only do well this season overall in all the other games, but to beat Michigan. If they go 11-1 with a loss to Michigan, there will be unhappy fans, even if they end up in the Big Ten championship game the next week or the college football playoff, which you would assume a team like Ohio State is going to really have a good chance of making. There will be people calling for his job before they play in a playoff game 2 or 3 weeks later. It's just the reality of the situation. So yes, they've improved the talent on their team, which is hard to do when you have that much talent to begin with. They've added transfers. They've brought guys back that didn't go to the NFL. They have new coaches like Chip Kelly. They kind of revamped things a little bit. New quarterback. 5-star Jeremiah Smith coming in at wide receiver, the first number 1 overall recruit at the wide receiver position since Percy Harvin in 2006. And yet, they're the ones with all the pressure on them, and pressure has gotten to Ryan Day in the past. So we'll see how they do, but this should be a fantastic team, and really looking ahead to that game on November 30th. So much anticipation. Sharon Moore able to beat Ryan Day as the interim head coach for Michigan last season. Now he'll get his shot as the full-time head coach down in Columbus, where Michigan won in 2022. Donovan Edwards will make his return. A bunch of guys that played key roles in that game and in Michigan's last few seasons, including last year winning the national championship. So it's going to be a ton of fun. This whole schedule is going to be so much fun. So I'm excited for the season. We're 51 days away as we record here on Thursday, July 11th. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Make sure to like the video. Let's get this thing up to 300 likes. If you want Michigan to beat the Buckeyes, go ahead and like the video. Leave us a comment too. Give us your thoughts. What's the toughest game? Who's going to give Michigan a tough test that is unexpected? What's the trap game? All that. Leave it in the comments. Head to the Wolverine.com, promo code UM1 for 2 months of premium access for just $1. And we will see everyone next time.